Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Kavi Mahesh. I am currently the Dean of Research at PES University in Bangalore. I also head a research center on knowledge analytics and ontological engineering. In this lesson, we are going to look at knowledge management and we will try to understand what exactly is knowledge management. Many of you may be familiar with data management and information management. So, in this lesson, the main objective is to understand how knowledge management is different from information management or data management and why we need something called knowledge management. Knowledge itself is being talked about in all kinds of parlances recently. For example, you might have heard of terms like knowledge era or knowledge industry, knowledge economy, knowledge worker and so on. All of these are popular terms in the present day context. A few years ago, a couple of decades ago, nobody was talking about knowledge era or knowledge economy. People were talking in terms of information management and information age and so on. So, first let us try to understand what has changed in the environment, in the global world, and why are we talking about knowledge management suddenly. So, if you look at what has changed in the global context, especially in the 21st century, several important changes have happened. For example, globalization has happened, right? Earlier, whether it is economy or industry or agriculture or education, more and more things were done locally. Now, more and more things are done globally, which means any organization, whether it is a corporation, a multinational corporation or an international organization, it has many locations today. It has to deal with many languages, many cultures, many countries and so on. Another outfall of the globalization phenomenon is outsourcing, right? All of you know about the Indian IT industry, which essentially started because of outsourcing. So, work which was meant to be done in Western countries is being outsourced to India and other countries. So, the boundaries of these organizations are not local anymore, they are extensible. They can take a global scope through these operations like outsourcing. The third big change that has happened is the emphasis on intellectual capital, right? If you studied early books on economics and so on, they would tell you that land, labor and capital are the three important things that are needed to start and run any successful business. But in today's context, those have become secondary. Anybody can acquire land and raise capital and which means funding and money, and they can also get labor because you can get global labor through outsourcing and so on. But what is at real significance and shortage and importance is intellectual capital, by which we mean knowledge and the proprietary knowledge, the ability to create and leverage that knowledge to create products and services. So, that is the focus on intellectual capital, and that has brought knowledge to a central prominence, whereas earlier it was all about land, money and labor whenever it came to businesses. And the fourth reason why knowledge has become important was, I am sure even when you were growing up or when you were in school and so on, we had this notion that knowledge should be free and it should be available freely to everybody, whether it is through libraries or books or through education system. Those should not be expensive, those should be readily available. That there is a lot of good about that and that should continue to be so. But when it came to business and sometimes even in education and other spaces, publications and so on, knowledge has moved from what was earlier considered a public good to a positional good, right? In economics, talk about private good, public good and positional good. For example, your house and the assets that you have in your house are private goods. The refrigerator and the television that you own in your house is a private good, whereas a road or an airport or a park or a railway station is a public good. Now, there is this intermediate thing called positional good, which is neither private nor public, and knowledge is now considered a positional good because it is created by people, but it can be owned as intellectual property and it can be leveraged for economic benefit. Now, these are some of the big changes that have taken place, and because of this, knowledge management has come to prominence in the last couple of decades. Now, why should we care about this? Why is it needed? If you consider any large organization, whether it is a corporation or whether it is an educational institution or a government or non-governmental organization, for example United Nations and so on, these are typically very large organizations. And in a large organization, as a rule of thumb, if you have more than 100 people, everybody cannot know everybody else. So it is quite likely, you might have heard of things like the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. So there will be situations where knowledge is available in the organization, in the sense somebody has the knowledge, somebody knows something, or it is written in some document, some book, some publication somewhere, but it is not available to everybody. The whole objective of knowledge management is to make knowledge always available to the right person at the right time in whatever work they are doing. So knowledge should be very easy to find, it should be easy to trace, it should not become trapped, it should not become untraceable. Another aspect of this is some particular department or a group of people may hold on to knowledge and make it their own private thing. They may not be willing to share it with the rest of the community or the rest of the organization. Now that is we call formation of silos or territories. Now that is another big reason why knowledge management is needed, to take knowledge out of those restricted areas and make it readily accessible to everyone, so that the right person can use it at the right time to accomplish whatever they are trying to accomplish. So for all of these reasons, knowledge management has become very important and it has come to prominence in the recent past. So we call this avoiding of knowledge fragmentation. So knowledge should not get fragmented. How do we unfragment it and make it integrated, make it available as a whole to everybody in a particular community? The community may be employees of a company, it may be students in an organization, or it may be the whole society at large, all the people in India, for example, or the global population as a whole. Now in an ideal setting, the organization structure, that is again a term from management sciences, where they talk about the organization structure of a business or a company or a university, where the way it is divided into departments and units and sections and so on should be such that it mirrors the flow of knowledge. That means if one set of people are producing the knowledge and another set of people are consuming that knowledge, they should belong to the same unit. This ideal organization structure does not happen in practice. There is always some other reason which comes into conflict, maybe location, maybe different geographies, different cultures, languages, or even politics may enforce that the organization structure is not ideally suited for knowledge management. That is another reason why we need, say, specific intervention in the form of knowledge management to overcome these difficulties, so that knowledge is freely available to everyone. Now, what exactly is knowledge management? Can we define knowledge management, right? There have been many definitions of knowledge management. You can, if you search for the term or you read any book or literature on it, you will see dozens of definitions of knowledge management. And here on this slide, we have a fairly long definition of what is knowledge management. What we will try to do is dissect it. We will break it up into its essential parts and understand why all those long clauses and sentences are there in the definition of knowledge management. If you look at just the letters, the words that are in boldface, you will see that knowledge management is essentially the strategic management of people and knowledge to optimize knowledge sharing and utilization. So what do all these terms mean? Why should this be strategic management, right? Because knowledge management, unlike data or information management, is always tied with the higher level management of the whole organization. There is a strategy involved. It is closely related to the whole strategy of the organization, whether it is an educational institution, a government organization, or a commercial corporation. So it is called strategic management because it is closely linked to other strategies of the organization, which may be in terms of its financial strategies, growth strategy, or business strategy, or all of those have an impact and close linkage to knowledge management. So we say it is strategic management. So what exactly do we manage? We manage not just knowledge but also people, right? But you may say people knowledge management is something called human resource management, or HR as they call it. Those are, in HR you are mainly dealing with the recruitment of people, motivating people, how do you give them promotions, how do you assess their performance and so on. In knowledge management, people come into play because ultimately people are the ones who possess the knowledge, and people are the ones who are going to use the knowledge that is available to them in the organization. So managing people and managing knowledge are also closely related to one another. There is a term here which says knowledge representations, not just knowledge. Why do we have that? That is because many people might say knowledge cannot be managed. Knowledge is something that is in the heads of people, it is internal, it cannot be externalized, right? So you might have heard of terms like tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. They will say only explicit knowledge can be managed, and that is what we print in the form of documents and publish in the form of websites and so on. Other things like skills and tacit forms of knowledge cannot be managed. So here we are saying it is representations of knowledge that we are going to manage. So these representations can be either in the form of explicit knowledge, that is documentation of some form, or it can also be in the form of metadata. I am sure in other classes you have been taught about metadata and its role in information management. So you might have metadata about knowledge. For example, who created it, who owns it, when was it last updated, what are the keywords, how do you describe it, what is the value of it. All of these constitute the metadata of knowledge. So together we call these things knowledge representations. So knowledge management is strategic management of people and knowledge representations. There is a purpose for doing this, and the purpose is to optimize knowledge sharing and utilization. We want every process, everything that goes on in the organization to be optimized in terms of availability of knowledge. That means there should be no inefficiency or lack of quality introduced because of lack of knowledge or because of improper application of knowledge. So both of those things are very important when it comes to deriving the benefits from knowledge management. So how do we actually do this, right? Of course, along with knowledge management, we also have to manage content and information, right? So therefore we say managing people and knowledge representations along with associated content and information in an organization, and we do this using various technologies. For example, websites, information architectures, databases, search engines. These are all technologies that are used for doing the knowledge management. So there is use of technology, and the actual process may be in the form of transferring the knowledge either directly or indirectly between the source and the point of application. What is this direct versus indirect transfer, right? As we are talking to each other, if we were in a real classroom where we are sitting face to face with each other, that would be a direct transfer. And in what is right now happening in EPG Pathshala is what we call indirect transfer, because this whatever I am speaking now is being recorded and you are not sitting in front of me, you are going to watch this at a later time. So the knowledge transfer here is happening indirectly through technology, through video recording and then video streaming whenever you are actually watching this, downloading this or watching this lesson. So that we call indirect transfer, and the overall benefit of doing all of this is to optimize to all the functions of an organization. So you can see that knowledge management is at least a little bit more than just information management. When you are talking about data or information management, the focus is almost entirely on technology, on how do we make it efficient, what is the right data structure or information schema, information organization and so on. Aspects like people, strategy, benefits and so on do not come into picture in information management, and that is what makes knowledge management different from information management. So, if you look at the next slide, very briefly, knowledge management is just about connecting the knowledge needs of people with the knowledge sources through knowledge level representations of context attributes. We will take a few minutes to explore what is this complex thing called knowledge level representations of context attributes. There are people who need to know something that we call knowledge need. For example, somebody may be writing a proposal to be submitted, and that person may need to know various things to put together that proposal. They may have to go to a library and look up journal articles or books. They may have to do a Google search on the web. They may have to find out the history of what has happened before. Did my organization do something similar, a similar project before? All of those various kinds of knowledge are called knowledge needs, and that knowledge need arises at various points in the functioning of an organization. Similarly, we have various knowledge sources. I have already mentioned several of them: library, the internet, and experts who have a lot of experience in the company. All of them, whether it is people or documentation, we call them knowledge sources. Knowledge management is about connecting these two to get that optimal kind of functioning. How do we connect these two? Through this complex thing that we call knowledge level representation of context attributes. We will explore that and try to understand what that is. Before that, we need to distinguish between two kinds of knowledge management. Right? There is the informal variety and the formal variety. The informal variety is what happens informally. For example, you may meet somebody in your organization just because you have a common friend or a common colleague, a common acquaintance, or you may bump into somebody in the cafeteria while you are having coffee, and then some conversation, some exchange may happen, and knowledge transfer can happen through that also, right? Social networking, professional networking, all that can happen by accident, and that we call informal knowledge management. That is usually good enough for small organizations. If we say if we have less than 100 people, over time in 3 months or so you will know all of them, and then there is no need for any formal knowledge management system. Whereas in large organizations, especially when there are global organizations, multiple locations, multiple countries, different languages, different age groups, cultural backgrounds and so on, these kinds of informal engagements are unlikely to happen. That is when you need a formal system, a strategic approach to doing knowledge management. So, mostly when we talk about knowledge management, we are talking about the formal approach to knowledge management, not the informal approach. Now, various kinds of technologies and solutions are available for knowledge management, right? For example, for direct knowledge transfer, we say you have to do collaboration, teamwork, collaboration. Nowadays, technology is so advanced that these things can be done across geographies, across countries. For example, you can send messages through messengers like WhatsApp and Viber. You can have conference calls through Skype and so on. So, meetings can happen virtually, collaboration can happen virtually. So, there is a lot of scope for direct knowledge transfer without having to take long journeys and travel to have a meeting in another location. But still, indirect transfer is the primary focus of all knowledge management efforts for the most part. The reason is, what happens if those people, the people who have the knowledge need and the people who are the sources of knowledge, they are not working at the same time. The same time may be because of time differences, like daytime in India versus night time in America and so on. It can also be because of somebody retires and moves on, and then new people might have to reuse the knowledge that was created earlier. For all of these reasons, we are still focusing on indirect knowledge transfer as well, and there content management plays a very critical role, because now I am capturing all that knowledge. For example, this particular lesson being recorded is resulting in a video file which is multimedia content, which will be now put into some repository of PG Pathashala, and this EPG Pathashala is an excellent example of a content management system through which we are doing this indirect knowledge transfer. So, to summarize what I have said so far, we can say that knowledge management is a problem where, given a knowledge need, somebody needs to know something. How do I now, among all the sources of knowledge that are available, which may be in the form of thousands or millions of pieces of documents, books, articles and so on, plus thousands of people who have their own skill sets, their own knowledge and experiences, how do I find the best match, right? How do I find the best match to satisfy a given knowledge need? In other words, if I need to know something, where do I go? Which document should I read? Or whom should I ask? Of all the experts that are available in an organization, which are the right people whom I should go and approach for satisfying the knowledge need that has arisen? That is the sum and substance of what goes on in knowledge management. We have said that knowledge management is the problem of matching a knowledge need with the ideal knowledge resource, whether in the form of documents or people. How do we do this, right? As I said earlier, we have to rely on metadata or knowledge representations that are available. I am sure all of you are familiar with the regular metadata that is used in library and information science. For example, the Dublin core or DC attributes that are used to describe the author, title, publication date, publisher and so on, those are of course also useful in knowledge management. But by themselves, the Dublin core kind of metadata attributes are not sufficient for knowledge management. So, we have to explore and introduce what we call knowledge level metadata attributes, without which this matching problem cannot be solved in an optimal context. For example, how do I describe an expert, a person, in terms of metadata, right? The person himself or herself is not in my system. What will be in the knowledge management system is nothing but attributes or the profile of the person, and we have to consider this metadata. Now, this idea was somewhat difficult to explain a few years ago. Now that all of you are familiar with things like Facebook and LinkedIn and so on, everybody has a profile, right? What we are looking for here is not a Facebook profile, not a matrimonial profile, but a profile which describes the knowledge and expertise and experience and skills of the people. Now, if I have that, then I have an expertise directory and something like a search engine that can find me experts instead of documents. That is one of the key components of a knowledge management solution, a technology that is used in any knowledge management system. Now, I am sure you are also familiar with classification. You have various classification systems, but all of them are designed only for classifying publications, documents and books and papers. How do we classify people? How do I classify the expertise of people? If you take a large company, say for example Infosys, it has more than 1 lakh employees. A lot of them know a lot of things. How do I classify and catalog the profiles, the metadata of all those 1 lakh people, so that when I have a knowledge need, I can find the right person at the right time? That is the main problem in knowledge management, and that is why we have to look at the so-called knowledge attributes or knowledge level metadata. So, there is a picture on this next slide which tries to show you how all of this comes together, right? What are the things that happen in knowledge management? The actions. At the center is the actions, and the actions are things like creating knowledge, sharing knowledge, reviewing knowledge, rating and retrieving knowledge and so on. Who are the people who do all this? We call them the agents. So, ultimately it is people who are performing those actions, and they are using various tools and technologies, mainly computerized tools, as instruments in doing those actions, and those actions are performed essentially on knowledge. And when we say knowledge, we really mean the metadata or the representations of knowledge, and the beneficiaries of this are ultimately all the people who belong to that community or that organization. Now, so as already said, knowledge management does the following things. You represent knowledge, you store, integrate, deliver, retrieve, nurture knowledge. Those are the actions that are performed on the knowledge. This field of knowledge management is essentially interdisciplinary. From the kinds of things that we have discussed so far, you will see that it is related to computer science, to technology, to library and information science, to management studies, and there is a pictorial diagram here which shows its relationships to various other sciences. For example, on the right hand side there is information sciences, into which you can put things like information retrieval, digital library, text processing, and so on. On the left is management sciences. So there you have change management, human resource management, organizational behavior, customer relationship management, and so on. But there are two other areas which also play a very significant role in knowledge management. At the bottom is economics, because ultimately we are talking about knowledge economy, or utilizing these knowledge management technologies and solutions to optimize and improve the economic operations of a country or a government or a business. And at the top we have cognitive sciences. So the human psychology, education, learning, pedagogy, all of these are also involved in knowledge management. So it is at the center, the intersection of all these different areas, and so it is essentially an interdisciplinary field. You can talk about more specific reasons for doing knowledge management. What are the objectives, right? Whenever we take up any initiative or any venture, there must be clearly defined objectives. So this can vary from one organization to another. Knowledge management objectives and therefore the solutions also vary from organization to organization. This is not an area where there is a standard product. You cannot buy some solution for knowledge management like you have software for databases and software for office productivity and so on. There is no such standard solution for knowledge management, because the objectives themselves are different, the context is different, and the constraints of that organization are different. Some of the objectives that are commonly cited when it comes to knowledge management is improving quality, increasing productivity, reducing inefficiency or improving efficiency through reuse of knowledge, right? Reducing the overall risk for an organization, improving employee morale and the chances of retaining good employees and giving them motivation. All of these are different reasons that people talk about when they talk about the objectives of knowledge management. But knowledge management is not universally relevant to all kinds of organizations. If you take, for example, a post office or a bank, right, the kinds of activities that go on are very routine. The same kind of cash deposit, cash withdrawal, check deposit, account opening, account closure, demand draft, the same kind of operations are done over and over again in organizations like banks, post offices, and some factories. Knowledge management is not so important, not so much needed in such organizations. It is more needed in organizations where things are very dynamic, where things change a lot. For example, R&D, research and development organizations, or consulting companies, or startup companies, new organizations, very large organizations, global multinational corporations. Those are the kinds of organizations where knowledge management is more relevant and more important, not in routine where the same kinds of activities are repeated day in and day out. Right? We also talk about what kinds of organizations do not need knowledge management, and we talked about things like banks and post offices, but there are some other situations where knowledge management is not so important. In protected environments, for example, there is a monopoly, that means there is no competition, only one organization is doing that, then there may not be such a need for knowledge management. Another example is where there is protection in terms of import-export restrictions and so on. In those areas it may not be needed. And finally, very small organizations with just less than 100 people, they don't need knowledge management so much. So before getting into this idea of knowledge level attributes and knowledge level metadata, we must once again look at the dimensions that are involved in knowledge management. We talked about people and knowledge, but there is also technology and content. So essentially we say people, knowledge, process and technology, these are the dimensions in which knowledge management plays a role, and these are the components of any knowledge management solution as well. But one should also remember that there are benefits in doing this, and it is done in a strategic way. So, strategy and administration is also an essential dimension of knowledge management. Another way to understand knowledge management is by noting what is not knowledge management. This is especially relevant. We have a tradition in India, in our own culture and philosophy, of understanding something by looking at what it is not. So, in this case we can say database management is not knowledge management, library management by itself is not knowledge management, information management by itself is not knowledge management, and so on. Aspects of all of these are involved in knowledge management, but any one of them per se by itself does not become knowledge management, right. So, now let us come to this central problem of metadata and understand what we mean by knowledge level attributes. We can say that metadata occurs at three levels: data level, information level, and knowledge level. So, you can talk about data attributes, information attributes, and knowledge attributes. What are these and how is each one different from the other level, right? Let us take simply a file, let us say a video file or a data file that you have in your computer. Now, the data level attributes of that are things like what type of file it is. Is it a .mp4 file, .mp3 file, or is it a plain text file? What is its size in bytes or kilobytes or megabytes and so on? These are all simple data level attributes. Why are they simple? Because computers and software, they can deal with them very easily, right. Your computer tells you exactly what is the size of a file, what is the type of a file. For example, in some computers, if you just double click on it, it will automatically know which application to use to open that file, right. So, those are data level attributes. Information level attributes are a little more challenging. They are like the Dublin core attributes. For example, the computer software cannot always find out who is the author of an article, right, or even when was the web page last updated. It can tell you when the file was edited, but whether any significant change was made to that website, the computer will not know. So, information level attributes are like the Dublin core attributes, which any ordinary educated person can determine, but machines, computers and software cannot determine. Knowledge level attributes are the ones which only an expert in that domain can determine, right. Neither the machines themselves nor an ordinary educated person can determine. For example, if I ask you how good a book is, how good a particular textbook is, or which is the right textbook to understand a particular concept, then only somebody who knows that subject, who is an expert in that subject, can tell you that. Now, just any ordinary person cannot look at the table of contents and tell you how good the book is. They can tell you what is there in the book. So, what is there in the book, the table of contents, is an information level attribute. It is not a knowledge level attribute. So, in knowledge level attribute, we talk about the intrinsic properties of the knowledge itself or the context in which it is to be applied. Both of these, right, what we are called knowledge intrinsic attributes as well as the knowledge context attributes, those can be assessed only by experts in that domain, right. So, why do we need this knowledge attribute? Without this, various things will not get optimized, right. We will not get into the lot of depth or detail here, but it suffices for you to know that I will not be able to normalize against differences. For example, two documents may look very different, they may be in different languages or they may be written by two different people, but essentially the knowledge contained in them may be the same. And how do I now identify that the knowledge contained in them is the same? To give you a simple example, Wikipedia has only one page for each topic, right. How did that happen? It happened because different people are allowed to edit the same page, whereas in other modes of publication that never happen. There will be multiple articles on the same topic, many books written on the same topic, and we do not have any good way of automatically integrating all that into a single knowledge source, right. So, that kind of normalizing, right, measuring the quality, measuring the quantity or the value of that knowledge, right, providing the right grounding or the context in which some knowledge is to be applied. All of these kinds of things will not be possible if we are dealing only with data and information level attributes. Only when we get to knowledge level attributes, these things become possible. There are further reasons for why we want to look at knowledge level attributes. We will not get into that. Instead, we will look at an example. So now we will see table 1, which gives an example, right. This example takes several things on the left hand side. You have content, value, quality, purpose and applicability, and the 3 columns are for data, information and knowledge, right. At the level of data attribute, at the level of information attribute and at the level of knowledge attribute, we ask 5 different questions. The first question we ask is what is it? The second question is how much is in it? The third one is how good is it? Fourth one is what is it meant for? And the last one is how do we use it? You will see that these are all different questions. What is it is different from how much is in it. How much is it is different from how good it is. How good it is different from what is its purpose, what is it meant for. And the last one, how do I use it, how do I apply it, that is different from all of those as well. And we will take a few examples. So at the data level, if I give you a file and ask it what is it, the answer may be it's a MP3 file, right. That's a good enough answer to what is it. At the information level, that is not sufficient. If I ask you what is it, the answer may be it's a song, right. Now at the knowledge level, that is also not sufficient. You will have to say it's a politically motivated song, it is a popular song, whatever. Those are at the knowledge level. Similarly, if I ask you how much is it, in the data level, the byte size, it is 3.3 megabytes. That's an answer to how much is in it. But information level does not care about how many bytes. You will have to say it's a 5-minute long song. That's an information level attribute. At the knowledge level, it's very difficult to quantify things, right. How much of knowledge is there in that song? That song may be very trivial or it may be trying to convey some deep philosophical ideas. So things become very difficult at the knowledge level when you try to quantify or answer this question of how much is there in it. Similarly at the other levels, quality at the data level may be in terms of whether the file is corrupted or downloaded properly. At the information level, it may be in terms of the recording quality. Is there noise in the recording, or is the audio quality very good and the voice of the person is very good. Whereas at the knowledge level, is it a good song or a bad song is something very difficult to judge. Only experts, right, can rate the song and give. I am just taking the example of a song, but the same thing applies whether it is an article or a book or even the expertise of a particular person. Especially when you are talking about people, some of these may be politically very sensitive questions, right. I cannot classify 2 people and saying this person knows 40% more than the other person. That may be very politically incorrect thing to do. So a knowledge management solution has to be very sensitive to such things when it is trying to apply this. And similarly, finally, how do I use it? At the file level, at the data level, if you say how do I use this MP3 song, you will say use this MP3 player, right, or double click on it. That may be the answer. At the information level, it might say listen to it. It is meant for listening, it's not meant for reading. But at the knowledge level, you might say this is appropriate to be listened after dinner in a social setting, you know, this is a mood elevating song versus a depressing song. No, those kinds of things are all at the knowledge level. So these are all, it shows clearly the difference between metadata at data level, information level and knowledge level. Data level attributes are normally used by computers and all the software that we use. Information level is used in library and information management, and knowledge level attributes are used in knowledge management. So in conclusion, based on everything we have looked at, knowledge management is different from information and data management. Its primary focus is on knowledge. We see how to manage knowledge, but people are an essential part of it. People management is intrinsically or intricately associated with knowledge management. It is needed mostly in large organizations, in complex global organizations. It uses a lot of technology like content management, information retrieval and so on. It is regulated by formally defined processes, but it is also strategic and closely related to the strategic management and the benefits that an organization derives from it. It is an interdisciplinary field, and it is a very interesting and challenging field to know and to practice in today's global context.